Wow. Much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Thanks for tuning in once again. Appreciate you guys taking the time to do that. Today we're going to read from this book. This is a scan from the University of Pittsburgh, Darlington Memorial Library. And the book is called Ancient History or Annals of Kentucky, with a survey of the ancient monuments of North America and a tabular view of the principal languages and primitive nations of the whole earth, by C.F. Rafinsky. And these are all his titles, the clubs and societies he's part of, including the American Antiquarian Society and many others. This is from in the year 1824, just 24 years after the 1700s, guys. Okay, that's how old this book is. Now, a little bit about this book. I've had this book ever since the days we were doing From Indigenous American to African American series way back 5-6 years ago. And I've been kind of holding it all these years to try to understand the information. Shout out to 432 The Drop Radio with his Prester John series. When it comes to our people being in ancient Asia, that was all connected here. North America and parts of Asia over there, that was one empire. Eventually that was called Tartary too. It was all connected. We have old maps showing America very much connected to Asia. We know a lot of animals went from here into Asia. There was a lot more land connecting the Americas to Asia. We're going to read a lot of information here based on what the author is telling us, what he believes the origin and why. So we're going to pull out the babies, chew the meat, spit out the bone. We're going to dodge the hijack when we hear it and see it, as always. But for this video, we're going to just read this book completely. It's not a long book, so we can use it as reference for future videos I got. All right, so before we begin reading from Mr. Rafinsky, I want to remind everybody he has another book. He has several books, and Mr. Rafinsky is used a lot. He's quoted a lot when it comes to specific things people want to push. So this book is called The American Nations or Outlines of Their General History, Ancient and Modern, by C.F. Rafinsky, and he says, the tradition preserved by Gerardo Garcia and Charlevoix indicate a colony of Negroes or men painting black from South America. They might be the black Negroes of Quarequa, mentioned by Dangleria, or some other American Negro nation, of which there are many. Again, there are many Negro nations here, and they're not Africans, guys. See my account of ancient black nations of America. Dangleria mentions 2 wild tribes. American anthropology will teach that there were men of all sizes, features, and complexions. Features and complexions in this hemisphere before 1492, guys. This is the true old world, notwithstanding the false assertions of many writers who take one nation for the whole American group, okay? It wasn't one look. The Ushiks, the Puruyas, the Parayas, and the Chans were as white as the Spaniards. 50 such tribes were found in South America, while many tribes of Choco, the Manabis, the Yaruras, etc. were all black as Negroes, so-called black. All the other shades of brown, tawny, and coppery were scattered everywhere. Okay? So that's C.F. Rafinsky. So if you're going to use him and quote him and believe him here, let's see what else he has to say, right? We got another book of his, because after hearing today the information, a lot of people might be like, how do you know the author? That's just the author. Well, if you're going to take his word on this, let's see what he has to say about other things. All right, so let's go to the other book and let's start reading. So we're going to start here. It says here, Part 1, Procleo, or Geological Annals of the Revolutions of Nature in Kentucky. In every complete history of a country, ought to include an account of the physical changes and revolutions which it may have undergone. The documents for such a geological survey are to be found everywhere in the bowels of the earth, its rocks and strata, with the remains of organized bodies embedded therein, which are now considered as the metals of nature. The soil of Kentucky shows, like many other countries, that it has once been the bed of the sea. In James' map, the primitive ocean is supposed to have covered North America by having a former level of 6,000 feet above the actual level. Since the highest land in Kentucky do not exceed 1,800 feet, above the level of the actual ocean. They were once covered with at least 4,200 feet of water. The study of the soil of Kentucky proves evidently the successive and gradual retreat of the salt waters, without evincing any proofs of any very violent or sudden disruptions or emergence of land, nor eruptions of the ocean, except some casual accidents, easily ascribed to earthquakes, salsies, and submarine volcanoes. There are no remains of land or burning volcanoes in Kentucky, nor of any considerable freshwater lake. All the strata are nearly horizontal, with valleys excavated by the tides and streams during the soft state of the strata. All right, so one thing here is I don't know if there's lakes now in modern Kentucky, man made lakes, but in his time, 1824, he's letting you know there's no real lakes over here. After these preliminary observations, I shall detail the successive evolution of this soil and its productions under 6 distinct periods of time, which may be compared to the 6 epochs or days of creation, and supposed to have lasted an indefinite number of ages. So it's here, first period, general inundation. Alright, so remember to dodge the hijack and just pull out the babies. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and the Spirit of God was moving over the waters. The briny ocean covers the whole land of Kentucky and the United States, rising above 4,000 feet over the Cumberland or Washioto Mountains, and 5,000 feet over the limestone region near Lexington. The Oregon and Mexican mountains alone rise above the waters in North America. All right, so you guys hear that? So at one point, what they're trying to say is Kentucky was underwater. Now, when we talk about in the beginning, right? In the beginning, the creation of the earth, we know the oldest land. We got the videos, we got the most famous geologists letting us know the oldest land out of the waters was the Laurentian Mountains there in Canada. So I picture a time when it was just that part sticking out, and then Kentucky and other parts are still underwater. And maybe like they're saying here, the Oregon and Mexican mountains are above the sea at that time, along with the Laurentian Mountains, right? Little by little, the land starts coming up, but Kentucky is still underwater. And then it says second period, emergence of mountains. The Cumberland or Washioto Mountains emerge from the sea, which sinks to the level of 1,500 feet above its actual level, and form a peninsula attached to the Allegheny Islands. Attached to the Allegheny Islands or mountain, you see, when the Allegheny mountain chain was an island, because the land was still rising. Can you guys picture that now? So all the highest points or mountains in the U.S. were like islands. Now remember, if this is the oldest land coming out the first, then all the other parts of the world are still underwater, maybe with a few mountain tops here and there starting to peek out. So the Allegheny Island, yeah, when that was an island or mountain, the schistose formations proceed underwater. The Black, Laurel, Pine, Log, and Jellicoe Mountains emerge successively after the Cumberland Mountains, and an inland sea remains between them, surrounded by sandy hills. I picture that. The heavy tides and rains furrowed these new lands and formed valleys through the soft, sandy strata. Grass and reeds grow, vegetation begins. Spring appear, streams begin to flow and gradually increase in length as the land extends, but decrease in depth and bulk by the excavation of valleys. It says here, third period, the emergence of the tablelands. Further diminution of the sea, till its level is reduced to 1,100 feet above the actual level, and all the tablelands and highlands of Kentucky become uncovered. An inland sea remains over the Ohio limestone basin, covering part of the states of Ohio and Indiana, and extending from the actual mouth of Scioto River to that of Salt River. It is bounded west and south by Muldrow Hill, or the absent of the central tableland of Kentucky, east by the Knob Hills of Kentucky and Ohio, north by the Silver Hills of Indiana. Another inland sea fills the actual Cumberland Basin, bounded north by the Green River Knobs, south by the Cumberland Mountains, and open to the west. The upper Cumberland Sea is drained. The Cumberland River flows, forms its upper valley, the falls, and empties into the Gulf of Cumberland. The Ohio flows above the Scioto and falls into the large limestone sea. A long and narrow strait is formed below the Silver Hills. Green River forms this valley. All those streams and their branches excavate deep valleys. The Kentucky River falls into the Limestone Sea below Red River. The knobs are formed like downs on the shores of the Limestone Sea. Muldrow Hill shaped like a wall, by the currents being principally composed of slate schist. Sea animals still living in the limestone sea, and their exuvias embedded in the last limestone schist. Fourth period, draining of the limestone sea. Level of the sea gradually reduced to 700 feet above the actual level. The limestone sea of Kentucky drained, but full of marshes and muddy swamps, lakes, clay, and marl salsas. The Ohio River and its branches, Kentucky, Licking, Salt, Miami, etc., excavate their valleys in the soft, muddy lime strata, which only became indurated after a long lapse of time. The plains and glades of the Cumberland Gulf are drained, and the sea recedes west of them to the alluvial gravel hills formed under the water between the actual Cumberland and Tennessee valleys. The alluvians and bottoms begin to form in the valleys and gulfs by the attrition of the strata and soil conveyed and deposited by the streams. Animals and plants increase and spread. The sea animals become gradually extinct, while the land animals multiply their individuals and species. Some small lakes and ponds left over the land. The sinks and caves of the limestone regions are formed. A soil is formed by the decomposition of strata and the decay of vegetable substances. Creation of mankind in Eden. In the highlands of Asia, What Asia? Adam, Admo or Adimo, first man, and Eve or Eva, life, are the parents of the primitive or antediluvian nation called the Adamites. This fourth period of Kentuckian history answers, therefore, to the sixth day or period of the general creation. The first and second periods of creation having produced the light, suns and stars, planets, and the earth with her primitive crystallized mountains, crystallized trees, mountains, rising from 10 to 30,000 feet above the actual ocean, besides the burning volcanoes. All right, we are talking about our ancient trees, crystallized mountains. Fifth period, Noah's flood. Great flood of Noah, Nu, Menu, or Nahu, in the eastern continent, which may have reached America. Tosh, the hijack. Eastern continent. If you keep going east from so-called Asia today, where do you end up? In America, Eastern, the farthest east. Yeah, of course the flood was here. He's going to tell you there was legends of the flood here. So he's saying they may have reached America, but has not left any evident traces of any such violent convulsion in Kentucky at least. The organic and human remains buried in the soil are all in gradual depositions. In Kentucky, the ocean, which still bathes its western corner, subsides gradually to 300 feet above its actual level, and abandons Kentucky forever, forming merely a gulf in the Mississippi Valley. The great northern inland sea of North America, which included all the Great Lakes and extended from the Mississippi to the Gulf of St. Lawrence, is gradually drained. The Great Lakes, with their outlets and falls, are formed. South of Kentucky, the Gulf Stream of Mexico deposits the alluvial ground reaching from Louisiana to New York. All the valleys of rivers and creeks in Kentucky, etc., receive their present shape. Stratas begin to consolidate. The ponds and marshes decrease, but the salsas or muddy volcanoes increase. Vegetation overspreads the soil. Animals multiply. Earthquakes are frequent. Some strata are deranged by them. All right, so he's comparing, the creation story with, how Kentucky was created. It's pretty interesting the way he's, the way he's explained it. Of course, it kind of looks like the same, but that's kind of what we figured when we're talking about creation story. It wasn't. We don't think it was literally 7 days. Periods. Sixth period, Pale Lake's flood. When the earth was separated, was another destruction or cataclysm. Great volcanic eruptions of the sea in Europe, America, with awful earthquakes convulsing the Atlantic Ocean, West Indies, Mediterranean, destroying many countries and men. Is this when so-called Atlantis went down? Parts of America went down? the ocean acquires its actual level, and the American continent its actual shape. Because it was different, huh? The strata become indurated, and the soil firm and solid. Lakes disappear, springs diminish, and streams decrease in bulk. Rains are less heavy, etc. Huge animals ramble over the soil, such as the mammoths or mastodons, elephants, megalonyx, big bears, elks, buffaloes, jaguars. They form licks. Some of them become extinct. Their bones are found at Big Bone Lick, Drennon's Lick, the Ohio Valley, and in the mud or alluvions, all right? Where? In America. All right. All right. We're in part two, or Cleo, as he says, or Historical Annals of Mankind in Kentucky. But he starts with the Adamites, okay? So, hey, talking about antediluvian people here. Religion, philosophy, geology, history, and tradition combined to teach and prove that mankind was created in Asia. Oh, really? So remember, all these authors are still with the whole out of Mesopotamia, out of Africa, all kind of these theories going into America. Even though they're saying the old world people were here, they're saying they came from somewhere else always. But remember, Asia, what Asia was all connected to North America. And that the second cradle of mankind after Noah's flood was also in the lofty lands of Asia. According to him, where did Noah really land? Future video. Could it have been North Carolina? Where mountains and peaks from 20 to 30,000 feet over our actual ocean arise among tablelands elevated from 10 to 15,000 feet. The loftiest tablelands and mountains of America are much less elevated from 6 to 22,000 feet at utmost, and they are besides entirely volcanic, unfit therefore to have been the cradle of mankind. All right, so he threw it off completely. But I want to put you onto something. You see, the tallest mountains in the world today are all eroded. So a lot of mountains in the Americas used to be a lot more taller. They have been eroded by time. And actually, some of the newest mountains in the world are actually some of the tallest because they're still growing, like the Himalayas. We went over this before, like in Georgia, a lot of those mountains were enormous thousands of years ago. They have been eroded with time. So his basis is really off. We already know Louis Agassiz again says the oldest land that came out of the water was in the Americas, the true old world. So that's the hijack with this whole Asia thing. We have a better understanding of this in 2023. So that's why he's saying that America was populated from Asia, but it's the other way around, the true old world. The first cradle of mankind was called Eden, or Ima, and was in the highest land of Asia. Where? The Adamites or antediluvians were spread over the eastern continent, but we have no positive proof that they came to America, as very few, if any, remains have been found that might be ascribed or traced to that previous existence of mankind. All right? But we already showed all the proof. He hasn't done that type of research because he's been looking in Asia the whole time. All right? He's stuck on Asia, Rafinsky in the 1820s. I shall not venture, therefore, to offer mere conjectures on that subject. All right? So he's like, I don't know anything about that, so I'm just not going to make up things. So stop making up things. He did make up things. He added mad conjecture when he's saying first cradle of mankind was in Asia over there, not in America. He already added his conjectures. Too late on that. And then he goes on to say all the American nations can be traced to the second human stock and need not therefore be deemed descendants of Adamites. All right. So again, his opinions and what is the second human stock. All right. But the truth is, the antediluvians came out of here. Atlantis was here. He's still putting that somewhere else. And then he's saying the second stock is after Noah had landed in Asia again. So he's putting all this in Asia. He's not connecting it to America. So it goes on to say the second cradle of mankind has received many names: Tiba, Tibet, Meru, Iran, Taurus, Ararat, etc., all referring to the lofty mountains of Asia. Noah, the second parent, monarch, and legislator of mankind, was known to all the ancient nations under the many consimilar names. He is the Nu of the Persians, Menu of the Hindus, Tanau of the Scythians, Ninu of the Assyrians, Uranu of the Celts, Penon of the Chinese, Menon of the Armenians, Akmon of the Atlantes, Menu of the Egyptians, Oannes of the Chaldeans, Nok or Cox of the Mexicans. All right, we had a Noah flood story too. I have a whole video on that. All right, so what do you mean we're not antediluvians? Nok or Mok of the Chiapas. The three sons of Noah were also known by many ancient nations under peculiar names. The principal nations of the eastern continent, which have contributed to people North America and Kentucky, were the Atalans and Cutans, who came easternly through the Atlantic Ocean. That's America. They've been here. The Atalans, the Cutans. So again, he's not going to put anybody in the Americas. But he says these people were in the Atlantic Ocean. So the Atalans, and the Cutans. The Iztacans and Ughuzians, who came westerly through the Pacific Ocean. Now he's saying that they came through Pacific. So again, he's saying it. Nobody was here. Everybody had to come from somewhere else, and we got to dodge the hijack on that. But let's continue reading what Rapinski has to say, right? So chapter 2, it says, the Atalans and Cutans. The history of those two nations and of their settlements in America may be divided into 5 periods as follows. From the dispersion of mankind to the first discovery of America, including several centuries. From the discovery of America to the foundation of the Western empires, including some centuries. From the foundation of these empires to the Pelagian revolution of nature, including several centuries. From the Pelagian revolution to the invasion of the Iztacan nations, including about 12 centuries. From the Iztacan invasion to the decline and fall of the Atalan and Cutan nations in North America, including about 30 centuries to the present time. It says here, first period, to the discovery of America. After the Noachian revolution of nature, mankind was spread again over the earth, from Iran, Iran, Meru, Shinar, or Kashmir, different names given to the highlands of Asia. All right, and don't assume all that is in modern-day Asia today. These are old world locations that they haven't found or located yet. They just gave these names to certain places today. Doesn't mean those were the exact places. The first colonists of the primitive nation preferred to reside on mountains. The mounds Shingar, Hima, Liban, Gaut, Shenchi, Laos, Altai, Kap, Arat, Kush, Ural, etc. in Asia. The mounts Karpav, Hemus, Arkad, Apennines, Alps, Pyrenees, etc. in Europe, and the mounts Atlas, Semen, Tigre, etc. in Africa, became the first abode of nations who gradually spread into the plains. Several empires were successively established in Hindustan, China, Turan, Persia, Egypt, Abyssinia, etc., which underwent many revolutions and sometimes attained universal dominion or preponderance. The nations which peopled the western shores of the eastern continent were the Gomerians in Europe and the Atlantes in Africa. The Atlantes settled, colonized. The Atlantes formed a powerful empire in North Africa, which gave laws to many nations such as the Lehabim or Libyans, the Futs, the Naftuhim or Numidians, the Warbars, the Barabars or Berbers, the Darans, the Garamans, the Korans or Guanches. Again, these are what? Atlantes people. It makes sense with everything we've been reading recently, right? In Europe, the Gomerians or Cimmerians, Gomer, Cimmerian, Japhet, divided into many nations. Those that occupied the seashores were first the Pelasgians, scattered from Greece to Ireland under the names of Thracians in Thracia, Arcadians in Greece, Lestrigons in Sicily, Sinostrians, etc. in Italy, Tubalans in Spain, Cutans or Penktons in France, Termorians in Ireland, and the Celts or Halis, who became Hellenes or Javanas in Greece. So the Celts became Hellenized, Celts became Hellenized, The Mexicans, Mexicans, Ausonians and Umbrians in Italy, Siculis in Sicily, Gauls in France, Hesperians and Gadelians in Spain, the Recodians in Ireland, Cumbrics in Scotland, Fiends or Feenies in England. Third, the Sakas, who became Magas in England, Saxons and Raisins in Germany, Etruscans and Tuscans in Italy, Sicanians in Sicily. Fourth, the Garbans, who became Cyclopes in Greece and Sicily, Ligurians in Italy, Cantabrians in Spain, Bascons in France. All those nations were intimately connected in languages and manners. The Pelasgians were bold navigators and ventured to navigate from Iceland to the Azores and Senegal. The Azores, Madeira, Canary, and Cape Verde Islands were then united in one or more islands called the Atlantic Islands, which have given the name to the Atlantic Ocean, and were the first populated by the Darans and Korans, Kora, Kara, or Western Atlantes. The Caribs, Karans, Korans, Darans, Dan, sea peoples from Atlantis, Western Atlantis. Iceland was called Uskara and was not settled owing to the severe climate and awful volcanoes. Numerous revolutions and invasions took place among those nations until at last the Atlantes of Africa united them all by conquest in one powerful empire which extended over North Africa, Spain, France, Italy, part of Greece, Asia, and lasted many ages under several dynasties and emperors. It was during the splendor of this empire that America was discovered by some bold navigators who were led by the trade winds to the West Indies. All right, so dodge the hijack because they were coming from America, these Atlantes. So he's seeing it in reverse and he's picking up the story much later. So dodge the hijack with this part. Some bold navigators who were led by the trade winds to the West Indies. And a few days from the Atlantic Islands, they called them Antilla Islands, which meant before the land. And America was called Atala or Great Atlantis. Oh, America was called what? The Great Atlantis. You see? Returning to the Azore land by northeast course, they extolled the new country, and a great settlement was soon formed in Ayati or Ayacuta, IT, and the neighboring continent by the Atlantes. It says here, second period to the foundation of empires. The Atalans or American Atlantes. So now he's splitting it and calling us American Atlantis. We are the Atlanteans. Spread themselves through North and South America in the most fertile spots, but the marshy plains of Orinoco, Marañón, the Anon, Paraguay, and Mississippi, as well as the volcanoes of Peru, Chile, Quito, Guatemala, and Anahuac, prevented them from settling those parts of the continent. Many of the subjects of the Atlantic Empire, such as the Tubalans, the Cantabrians, Cyclops, and Cutans, followed the Atalans in America and become the Cutan nations. It is very difficult to trace the American nations who have sprung from those early settlers, owing to the numerous revolutions and intermixtures which they have undergone. Nor is it my intention to give now a complete genealogy of the Atalan and Kutan nations. All right, he don't know the whole story. I must confine myself to North America or even Kentucky. The Allegheny Mountains were called Loca Loca. Beyond them, the country was called Great White Land, Mahaswe Tabumi of Hind, and it became the seat of a great empire, or the Western Atlantic Empire. This included, of course, Kentucky, but extended from Lake Ontario in the north to the Mississippi. The Atlantic shores called Locuta or Lakakuta were not settled owing to their arid soil, lately emerged from the sea. This Western Empire may be called the Atalan Empire. Third period, to the revolution of Peleg. And in the Bible says, in the days of Peleg, the land was separated. The country watered by the Ohio and its branches was the center of the Atalan Empire. Ohio, the center, the beginning, the start of it all, of Atalan Empire, Ohio. All right, again, pull out the babies. And its metropolis stood somewhere in the Ohio. Isn't there like a whole mound building culture there, Hopewell, Adena, and all that? It was divided in several provinces and ruled by a powerful monarch of the Atlas family. The Atlantic monarchs of Africa, Europe, Atlantia, and Atala often contended for supremacy, so it was a world kingdom, and the Atalan emperors obtained it once. Their dominion extended from Atala to Syria, all the way to the other side. All right? They were repulsed in Greece and Egypt. The African emperors were acknowledged generally as lords paramount, but they resided in Europe. As often as in Africa, they resided in Europe and had to contend against the Titans, a branch of their family reigning in the Alps. There were successively many Atlantic emperors and monarchs bearing the names of Ion, Atlas, Akman, Uran, Elon, Silvan, Sanu, or Sartur, Japet, or Judish, Titan, Neptune, or Neptur, Flut, Evenor, Oanis, Derceto, Triton, Muth, Lucib, Rahu, in both continents, who were often at war with the monarchs of Egypt, Ethiopia, Scythia, Iran, and Bharata, or Hindustan. All intercourse was kept up more or less regularly between all the primitive nations and empires, from the Ganges to the Mississippi. Krishna, or Hercules, and Ramachandra, two heroes of India, visited Atala. They were from here. This is the true old world. Who was Hercules? Samson, the Danite, future video, and the court of the Western monarchs, which is called one of the heavens on earth by the Holy Book of the East. Again, what do they say about America? One of the heavens on earth by the Holy Books. The Atalans were civilized like the Atlantes, lived in towns, built houses of wood, clay, and rough stone. They worshipped the sun and moon as emblems of the deity, and built them circular temples. They knew geometry, architecture, astronomy, glyphic science, or writing, all right? This is in ancient America. The use of metals, agriculture. They had public games, festivals, etc. Public games. Their food was fresh fish, fruits, roots, and corn, which they brought from the east. What do you mean, corn? You see what I'm saying? Corn is from America. They didn't bring that from the east, you see? So that's what I mean about him saying Asia is the east. This is the east. Corn is from here. At the time of their highest prosperity, a dreadful convulsion of nature happened in the Atlantic Ocean and other parts of the world, which is recorded in the oldest annals of many nations, the Hebrew, the Hindu, Chinese, Mexican, Greeks, Egyptians, etc. It appears to have been occasioned by simultaneous eruptions of volcanoes and earthquakes, which sunk, destroyed, or convulsed many islands and countries, and among others, the Atlantic land, of which the volcanic islands Azores, Madeira, Canary, and Cape Verde are the remains. In America, the Atilan lands were severed, the Carib Islands formed, the Atlantic shores inundated by awful tides, and many countries sunk or altered, all right? In America, this is where it's happening. This cataclysm is the division of the earth under Peleg, the flood of Ughuzians or Ogug, the Sankris convulsion of the White Sea or Atlantic Ocean. It's all the same story. The terror occasioned by this phenomenon interrupted the intercourse between Europe and America. So you see what they're saying? Because of what happened, no more communication with America. The Eastern Atlantis thought that the whole American continent had sunk, like the Atlantic and many Atilan islands, and the Atlantis of the interior of America became insulated and separated from the Atlantic Empire. You see? So the colonies we had on the other side of the world, they thought the whole of the Americas had gone down. Remember? And this is when they said they couldn't come through because it was muddy. This is during Plato's time when they're telling the story of Atlantis. They're saying that the Atlantic was full of mud. They couldn't cross it. All right, so we continue here. It says, fourth period to the Iztacan invasion. The Atalans of North America became now divided in many states and nations, such as the Apalans or Tlapalans scattered from Florida to Virginia, the Timalans from Texas to Guatemala, the Pocans to Locans from the Allegheny to Panama. These divided again into Golocas, Conois, Nanticos, Solucans, Lomachas, Popolocas, Wakans and Poconchians, the Korans from Missouri to Mexico, the Talagans in Kentucky, Illinois, Ohio, Virginia, etc., while the Cutans of North America became also independent and formed many nations such as the Ayacutans of Haiti, the Lacacutans of Cuba, and Alacuans of Florida, the Yucatans of Mexico, and Ughuzians of Bahamas. Something to look into and research, see why he's saying all this. The Arahuans of many islands in South America, the Tunicas of Louisiana, Tepenacas and Tononacas of Anahuac, the Panucans of Texas, and the Tanutans of Tennessee, the Catawbans of Carolina and Florida, the Catawba, all right, of the Carolinas and Florida, the Cusans, Cusadans, or Quesadans of Tennessee and Alabama, all right, the Cusa. All those nations were often contending for supremacy, except the islanders, who became happy, peaceful nations, whence the West Indies were called the Fortunate Islands, when discovered again. When discovered again, huh? How can you keep discovering a place where there's always been people? Dodge the hijack. It appears that the Talagans of the Ohio and the Atalans south of them were two of the most powerful empires of that period. The Atalans had many provinces or tribes, such as the Apalaches, the Apalejen, Tlapan, the Alatamaha, the Ichiti, all right, the Hichiti, talking about the Creek Muscovian speaking people, the Opelousas, etc., and were often at war with the Talagans. All right, pretty interesting. These Talagans, which we found named Talegawes or Aleganis afterwards, had dominion over a large extent of the country. Their several provinces were situated in the most fertile regions, such as Kentucky, Ohio, the Kenhawaii Valley, the Illinois, the banks of Lake Erie, and Ontario. After some centuries, America was visited again by nations of West Europe and Africa. Oh, really? Let's see what he says. But neither frequently nor in numbers. A casual intercourse was restored between the two continents. The Azores were visited, as well as Madeira, but not people owing to their active volcanoes. But the Canary or Hesperides Islands were. From thence the navigators went to Cerne or St. Jago, and in 18 days to the Carib Islands. About this time the Carib or Galibis must have come to South America. They appear of Cantabrian origin. Who are the Carians, Cantabrian? You see that correlation he's doing? But they're always seeing it in reverse, guys. This is the true old world. He keeps saying people came over here. The great nation of Guarani, which extended all over Guyana, Brazil, and Paraguay, was of Daran origin and previous arrival. Again, seeing it in reverse, possibly. He's saying they're Darans, these are old world people. All right, this is Rafinsky telling you there's old world people here. Too bad they're just seeing it in reverse. When the Arcutans or Fomorians of Ireland were expelled by the Danans of a tribe of Palis or Gauls, all right, who's the Danans? Tribe of Dan, Fomorians, possibly Hamites. He's saying when the Danites expelled these Hamites from Ireland, check out my Ireland videos. After many revolutions in the island, they fled to Ayacuta or Western Island of Haiti and became probably the Arawak nation. Now, Dash the hijack, he just said probably the Arawak people came from South America. All right, but he's saying the Fomorians, when they were kicked out, they never tell us where they went, right? In history, he's saying they came to the Americas possibly. Till then, all the inhabitants of America had come from the east. Again, Dash the hijack, but now a great invasion took place from the west or from Asia. Perhaps these Asiatic nations that crossed the ocean before the Pelagian or Ughuzian catastrophe. They are traced to the northwest coast of America and gradually came in contact with the Atalans and Cutans on the Missouri and in Anahuac. I shall call them Iztacan, from their ancestor Iztac. All right, and we're going to go into this part. Says fifth period, decline and fall of the Atalans. The wars which happened in consequence of the Iztacan invasions, had the effect to annihilate some nations and scatter many other, while several were subdued and incorporated with their conquerors. Kentucky was conquered by the Olmecas. All right, pay attention. We're gonna try to, pull out the babies and dodge the hijack here and there, but something to definitely research and look further into. So he's saying Kentucky was conquered again by the Olmecas, the Huasiotos, and Taensas, three Iztacan nations. After the successive rule of these nations on the Ohio, the Siberian nations or Ughuzian tribes began to appear and wage war on the Iztacans and the Atalans. So even though he's saying that these Iztacans are possibly coming from Asia, he's saying they're separate from the Siberian nations. These ain't the Siberians. They started waging war on the Iztacans and the Atalans, he's saying. The Siberians, which they drove away to the south. The last remains of the former Atalans and Cutans, which can be traced to have escaped these conflicts and were still existent toward 1500 with the following. Okay, listen. The Wokons in Carolina, the Homoloas, the Malikas, the Appalachians, and others in Georgia and Florida, the Conoys of Virginia, the Nanticokes of Maryland, the Catawbas of Carolina, the Cowitas and Calusas of Alabama, the Tunicas of Louisiana, the Corans, the Coroas or Escoros of the Missouri, Arkansas, Carolina, California, and Mexico, besides many nations of Anahuac, etc. Before the Christian era, a casual intercourse was kept up between the two continents. The Phoenicians and Gadicians traded to America, okay? Again, seeing it in reverse, we got a whole video. We know the true Holy Land, what they're calling Canaan, was in America, yes. And so Phoenicians or sea peoples included many people coming out of Canaan or Phoenicia, a city, right? That same name was carried to Finland. Yeah, that's where they get in the name. They ended up over there. So we've been seeing it in reverse again. A lot of Danites included in the Phoenicians or sea peoples. Check out my Danites videos. Either way, they're letting us know a connection with Phoenicians in America, just like all the inscriptions and everything we've already been learning about that. This is the true old world, of course. Yeah, they traded with America. Most of their resources were coming out of here and trading to the rest of the world. This continent was known to the maritime nations of West Europe and Northwest Africa, of course. The Numidians went there 2,000 years ago. Well, I would say Numidians came out of here, what the same Arthur earlier was calling the Western Atlantes. Yeah, as well as the Celts. And I again would say a lot of those Celts, who are these Celts? A lot of Israelite tribes coming out of the true Egypt, ancient Egypt here, the true Holy Land. So again, all this in reverse. They frequented Paraya and Haiti principally. So they were all over here, is what he's letting you know. These same people you know in the old world. The Etruscans, a powerful nation of Italy who settled there from the Rhetian Alps about 3,000 years ago, went to America and wanted to send colonies there, but were prevented by the Carthaginians, okay? Again, seen in reverse, but all these old world peoples were here. All this is happening, a lot of it here. This intercourse gradually declined, owing to the numerous shipwrecks and warlike habits of the Caribs, Iztacans, and Ughuzians, till the knowledge of America became almost lost or clouded in fables and legends. It became lost, and now the same author is trying to keep it lost. When he keeps saying that nobody was over here, everybody had to come from somewhere else. But this was a part of the old Atlantis. It just broke away. A lot of it sank, but a lot of it is still above water. We're still here. And all these legends of these mythical paradises, these ancient lands, it was always talking about America. During the decline of the Atalans, some fled to Anahuac and South America, where they founded new empires or civilized many nations, such as the Cholulans of Anahuac and the Muisis, Coruas, and Coloas, Tiwanacos, and Cojas of South America, who ascribed their ancient civilization to white-bearded strangers. Dodge the hijack. They meant the beard was white, old men wise with long white beards, and never said nothing about complexion. They take that out of context again. As you guys can see, it's a pattern with these authors. They want to make only so-called white people the civilizers of America. Thus, the ancient arts and sciences of North America were transferred to the south. In the greatest splendor of the Atalans and Cutans, they had built above 1,000 towns of the waters of the Ohio, of which nearly 200 were in Kentucky, and the remains above 100 are seen to this day. The population must have been as great as the actual one, and Kentucky must have had 500,000 of inhabitants at least. The monuments of these early nations are easily distinguished from the subsequent Iztacan monuments by a greater antiquity, their circular, elliptical, and conical shapes. All right, and we continue in the book. This is chapter 3, History of the Iztacans. So remember, grab all the knowledge that you guys have from your research with the research that we've done on this channel and try to apply what he's saying, try to make sense out of it all, because remember, he's just one-sided, and this is written in 1824. But there's a lot of good gems here to pull out. It says here, chapter 3, History of the Iztacans. The annals of the numerous nations who claim this origin may be divided into 5 periods of time. From the Iztacan Empire of Asia to the Iztacan settlements in America and Kentucky, including many centuries. From the invasion of Kentucky to the foundation of the Natchez Empire, including about 10 centuries. From the Natchez Empire to the Ughuzian invasion, including about 5 centuries. From the Ughuzian invasion to the expulsion of the Natchez from Kentucky, including about 5 centuries. From the Natchez expulsion to the present time, including the Chickasaw and Cherokee dominions in Kentucky, about 10 centuries. All right, so they're breaking it down. They're telling you these are different time periods, which include a lot of centuries in between. First period, to the invasion of Kentucky. Soon after, the formation of the great Asiatic empires of Iran, Ayodhya, Vitora, China, and others, etc. Another was founded near the Caspian Sea, on the mountains of Kaf or Caucasus and Vipula or Bactria, which were successively called Astula, strong land, Aztlan, Tula, Tolan, and Turan, etc. All right, this is deep right here. And again, all I can think about is the research, the great research that brother 432 The Drop, Radio Con Drop has done with his Prester John series, including all these nations over there in Asia and this whole region over there, what they're talking about here, and how they connect to the ancient Americans, really. Shout out to War Chief Red Lion too for the drop. He had all this drop, about Turan and all that. So we might be starting the story, at a certain point here where Rafinsky, maybe he didn't go far enough. Like, how did those people get there? But still, so according to him, this is where he picks up the story of these people, right? Again, Aslan, Tula, Tolan, Turan, etc. Container says the first monarch of it was Istak Miscolt, strong-head snake. He had 6 sons who became the heads of as many nations. They were Shelhua or Kulhua, the father of the Kulhuans. Now I know that Shelhua is also, if I remember correctly, part of a legend, American Indian legend of a giant, right, in Cholula, who built the Cholula so he wouldn't go through a flood again, just in case. So I don't know if it's the same Shelhua, but Shelhua or Kolhua, the father of the Kolhuans, etc. Tenoch or Tenuk, ancestor of the Tenuks, etc. Olmecult or Ulmecult, ancestor of the Olmecans, etc. Shikalan cult or Shikalhan of the Sikalans, etc. Mixtecult or Mistecult of the Tecas, etc. Otomilt, ancestor of the Otomis, etc. All right, some familiar names here. From these have sprung all the Iztacan nations scattered all over North America and part of South America. Many other empires having begun to rise in the vicinity of Aslan, such as those of Bali, Scythia, all right, sons of Isaac, Tibet, Oghuz, the Iztacan were driven eastward, north of China. But some fragments of the nation are still found in the Caucasus, such as the Abians or Abbasans, Alticesecs, Cushasips, Chungsacs, and Mojors, etc. The six Iztacan nations being still pressed upon by their neighbors, the Ughuzians, Moguls, gradually retreated or sent colonies to Japan and the islands of the Pacific Ocean. The islands, the South Pacific Ocean, they're definitely retreating because of these Moguls or Ughuzian nations. So they're not part of them. Having discovered America at the peninsula of Alaska during their navigations, the bulk of the nation came over and spread from Alaska to Anahuac. All right, that's kind of like a Bering Strait theory he's adding there. These people had ships, so they wouldn't just go to Alaska. Established in many states in the west of America, such as Tula, Amaquemecan, Tehuajo, Navajo, Teopantla, Huehue, and many others. After crossing the mountains, they discovered and followed the Missouri and Arkansas rivers, reaching thus the Mississippi and Kentucky. All right, listen to this. So that's where these Atalans were, right? Remember, they were already there. Second period to the foundation of the Natchez. The Olmecas, or Olmecs, were the first Iztacans who ventured to come to Kentucky, where they did not make a permanent settlement. They came in contact with the Talegans, and not being able to subdue them, they left the country, invaded Tennessee. The Winginas and Westos of Carolina, as well as the Yamasees of Georgia, may be remains of these Olmecas, but the bulk of the nation went to Anahuac, all right? But most of them went where? To Mexico, Anahuac, with the Chicalans, having made an alliance with them. The Chicalans were another Iztacan nation who had come down the Arkansas, meeting on the Mississippi with powerful Atalans, such as the Cutans and Talagans, etc. They joined the Olmecas in a confederacy against them. So you see that? They joined against the Olmecas when they got there, and the Chicalans and Olmecas got together, and, they tried to defend themselves against the Atalans. But eventually they got together and ended up in Mexico together, or Anahuac. After partly settling in Alabama, Tennessee, Georgia, and Florida, they were both compelled to go to Anahuac, which they reached from the northeast and where they became powerful in time. The Otomis were the most barbarous of the Iztacans, being hunters rather than cultivators. They had spread gradually from the Missouri to Anahuac in the rear of the Chicalans, under the names of Masahuas or Mahas, Coachachas or Osagis, Capajas or Arkansas, Otos or Coatoctas, Minowas or Missouri or Iowas, Dareotas or Nadowesis, Huatanis or Mandans, etc. They began to make war on the Talegans of Illinois, Ohio, and Kentucky, and the Otos appear to have become the Sciotos of Ohio, the Huasiotos of East Kentucky, and the Utinas of Florida. All right, a lot to break down here and further research, right? But hey, he might be onto something. Again, let's just pull out the babies. The Culhuans and the Tenucans came the last on the Arkansas and settled the kingdom of Tolan, Tula, Huehue, Copata, etc. in that region. The Atalans and Iztacans were successfully at war or in peace, but the Iztacans prevailed at last in West Kentucky when all the Iztacans east of the Mississippi formed a confederacy against the Atalans. This was the beginning of the Natchez Dominion. During these struggles, many peaceful Atalans left the country and went to Anahuac, Ayati. So they left this region, right, and went to Mexico, Haiti, Onahualco, and South America, where they became legislators and rulers. Judges and rulers. Continuing, says here, third period, to the Ughuzian invasion. The Natchez Empire or Confederacy of Iztacan nations extended from the Ohio to Florida and from the Alleghenies to the Mississippi. West of it were the kingdoms of Capaha, Pacaha, and Copata, perhaps only one, also Iztacan. This confederacy consisted of 500 towns and many tribes such as the Natchez, Taensas, the the Chitimacas, Movila, the Jasus or Hiasus, and many more. East of them were the Appalachian and Catawba confederacies, and north the Talegans who had retreated on the north side of the Ohio. The nations forming this empire or league were civilized and cultivators. They became polished by their intercourse with the Atalans and borrowed many customs from them. They worshipped the sun and fire, but did not build circular temples erected instead of pyramids and high altars, generally of a square or angular form. Each tribe had a king, each town a governor, but the Natchez kings, who were called sons, had the supremacy over all. Agriculture and trade were well attended to. Many contentions and revolutions happened, but the Ughuzian invasion was the most fatal. The Siberian nations, all right, all of a sudden here comes the Siberians, which had spread over the north of Asia at the dissolution of the Ughuzian Empire, having come to America across the Bering Strait, sought milder climates by traveling south, and coming in contact with the civilized but less warlike nations of anterior origin, began to wage war over them and drive them gradually further south towards Florida and Anahuac. You see, cornering. They went all the way to the East Coast. Who, Siberians? A lot of people ask me, hey, where these other people come from? Hey, there's a long history here, but we just can't generalize, you know? We just know. But pointing fingers don't do anything, because it's very complex, this history. Fourth period, to the expulsion of the Natchez from Kentucky. At the Ughuzian invasion, the Taencas, a Natchez tribe, occupied West Kentucky. The Huasiotos were in East Kentucky, and some Talegans still held the banks of the Ohio, etc. The Cherokees or Sulocans, an Atalan nation dwelling west of the Mississippi, being driven by the Ughuzians, came to Kentucky and Tennessee and settled at last after many wars in the mountains of Carolina, where they became a nation of hunting mountaineers and gradually destroyed the Huasioto nation of the Cumberland Mountains. Destroyed? You see? And like I said, war amongst each other. The Shawanese and Ughuzian tribe came then in contact with the Natchez and expelled them from Kentucky. The Shawnees, which they occupied for a long time. The Talegans north of the Ohio were partly destroyed or driven south through Kentucky to join the Appalachian or down the Mississippi towards Louisiana and Mexico. Fifth period, to the present time, the Natchez Confederacy declined gradually, becoming divided into several independent nations, such as the Taensas, the Chitimacas, Alabamas, Cusas, Calmitas, Ocoetas, Winginas, etc., spread from Louisiana to Carolina, which however did not wage war together, but were often united against the Cherokees, Catawbas, and Ughuzian nations, all right? Like I said, war amongst each other is not just about Siberians. When the Toltecas of Mexico drove away the Chilcalans, the bulk of that nation came to the Mississippi. So remember, the Chilcalans and the Olmecas had been driven out from this area already. They went down to Mexico, and then the Toltecas drove them back into the Mississippi, and they settled on both sides of it, above the Natchez. Many nations have sprung from that stock, all intimately connected in language and manners, such as the Chickasaws, the Choctaws, Jasus or Tapusas, Muskogees, Cosaches, etc., spreading north and east of the Natchez. They formed a bulwark between them and the northern invaders. The Chickasaws extended their conquest to the banks of the Ohio in Kentucky. The great Otomi nations, extending from the Missouri to the Anahuac, divided into numerous tribes such as the Osages or Washashas, Missouris, Otos, Masahuas or Omahuas, the Omahas, right? Capajas or Arkansas, Mandans, etc. The Osages, Missouris, and Arkansas penetrate as far as West Kentucky, the banks of the Wabash. A succession of wars and contentions take place between the numerous nations of various stocks scattered in North America, by which they are weakened and prevented from improving their civilization or uniting against the encroachments of the Europeans. The Spanish, French, and English, after the discovery of America by Columbus, the hijack, settled in North America, and in 300 years occupy all the land from Canada to Mexico, except a few small spots, acquiring possession of it by various means, conquest, cessions, or purchases. And we go on to chapter 4. It says here, history of the Ughuzians. Something like a chronological order can be now introduced. The records of the Mexicans, the traditions of many Ughuzian nations, and the annals of the Europeans afford sufficient materials for a complete history, but I must be very brief. Says here, first period, from the invasion of North America by the Ughuzians toward the first year of our era, to the defeat of the Atalans toward 500, including 500 years. Nearly 2,000 years ago, great revolutions happened in the north of Asia. The Ughuzian Empire was severed, and a swarm of barbarous nations emigrating from Tartary and Siberia spread desolation from Europe to America. In Europe, they nearly destroyed the powerful Roman Empire, and in North America, they subverted many civilized states. Several of those Ughuzian nations, driven by necessity or their foes to the northeast corner of Asia, came in sight of America and crossing Bering Strait on the ice. All right, again, Dr. Hijack. Many of these nations had ships. They reached North America. Two of them, the Lenape and the Mengwe. All right, so they're saying the Lenape, and even the Lenape say that, and the Mengwe, seeking milder climates, spread themselves toward the south, while another, the Karitit, which came after them, spread on the seashores from Alaska to Greenland, and some others settled on the northwest coast of America. The Lenapes, after settling some time on the Oregon and Multnomah rivers, crossed the Oregon mountains and following the Missouri, fighting their way through the Otomis, etc., they reached the Mississippi, nearly at the same time with the Mengwes, who had come north of the Missouri. They found the powerful Talagans in possession of Illinois, Ohio, Kentucky, who opposed their progress and cut off the first party that ventured to cross the Mississippi. A long war ensued in which the two Ughuzian nations joined in a confederacy against the Talagans. All right, they're talking about Lenapes, are Ughuzian. So the Lenapes and the Mengwe joined together against these Talagans. Remember who the Talagans are? Part of the Atalans that were already here. So they can cross the Mississippi, and succeeded after a long struggle to drive them away to the south. It says here, second period, from the defeat of the Talagans towards 500 to the dispersion of the Lenapes towards 800, including 300 years. When the Lenapes had defeated the Talagans, they had to contend with the Natchez of West Kentucky, the Huasiotos of East Kentucky, and the Sciotos of Ohio, besides many remaining branches of the Atalans, Cutans, etc., scattered in North America, which they vanquished, destroyed, or drove away, occupying all the country from the Missouri to the Allegheny Mountains, while the Mengwe settled north of them on the lakes. The Lenapes were hunters, but lived in towns and became partly civilized by the prisoners and slaves that they made. They began to cultivate corn, beans, squashes, tobacco, etc. Their hunters, having ventured across the Allegheny Mountains, discovered a fine country, not occupied by any nations, in Maryland and Pennsylvania. Listen, this is where they ended up, right? The Lenapes. Many were induced to remove to that country, where they should be more distant from their southern foes. A settlement was made east of the mountains, and the great Lenapean nation became thus divided into many distant tribes, independent of each other, but connected by a similarity of language, religion, manners, and acknowledged origin. The principal of these tribes, which thus became independent nations, were the Chinooks on the Oregon, the Anilcos and Iniguas of the Missouri, the Ottawas and Miamis north of the Ohio, the Chawanis or Massawamis in Kentucky, and the Mohegans and Abnakis in New England, the Sankikans in New Jersey, the Unamis and Mincies in Pennsylvania, the Powhatans in Virginia, the Nanticokes in Maryland, the Chippeways and Clistenos on the upper Mississippi, etc. A similar division took place in the Mengways, and the independent nations from them were the Hurons or Wyandots near Lake Huron, the Eries or Eddigas on Lake Erie in Ohio, the Tuscaroras in Kentucky, the Senecas, Mohawks, Cayugas, Oneidas on the St. Lawrence, etc. That portion of the nation which remained west of the Mississippi became mixed with some Ottoman tribes and formed a great Dakota nation, since divided into the many tribes such as the Sioux, Assiniboines, Cutans, Jacktons, etc. Third period, from the dispersion of the Lenapes toward 300 to the Shawans Confederacy towards 1100, including 300 years. The Ughuzian nations had united for a long while against their southern enemies, but many Mengwe tribes became jealous of the Lenapes when they saw them possessed of the best lands and growing very powerful. Dissensions occurred between the various tribes east and west of the mountains. The Senecas and Mohawks began to quarrel with the Mohegans and Lenapes. They endeavored to excite wars between them and the Cherokees. Several wars occurred between the Lenapes and many Mengways in which the Wyandots and Eddigas take no part. Meanwhile, the Shawanese of Kentucky have many quarrels and wars with their neighbors. They drive away the Tuscaroras to Carolina and some Eddigas towards Florida. They wage war by turns with the Natchez, Tapusas, Cherokees, and Appalachians to the south with the Catawbas, Wokons, and Westos to the east, the Capahas, Osages, etc. to the west. Not satisfied with the possession of Kentucky, they extend their conquest and settlement as far as Lake Ontario to the north, and Carolina and Georgia to the south. The Cumberland River became the center of their settlements. They were hostile to all their neighbors, except those of Lenapian origin, and began in contact with many more than any other branch, were considered as the bulwark of that nation. In order to resist their numerous enemies, they formed a general confederacy extending from the lakes to Florida, which soon became formidable even to their former allies, under the name of Massawamis or Wassawamis. The branches of this great alliance were known by the names of Sakis and Kikapus in the west, Uchis and Chowans in the east, Satanas in the north, Savannas in the south, etc. Fourth period, from the Shawnee Confederacy towards 1100 to the Ottawa Supremacy towards 1400, including 300 years. The Ottawas were a branch of the Lenapes, settled north of the lakes, and holding supremacy over the northern Lenapes. Being driven south of the lakes by their wars with the Mengways, they assumed a superiority over the Miamis of Ohio, whom they defeated in battle, but they had more difficulty in their contentions with the powerful Shawanese. A long war was the result. The Ottawas conquered part of central Kentucky and compelled at last the Shawanese to acknowledge them as superiors and entitled to hold a great council fire in the west as the Lenapes did in the east. During this struggle, many revolutions had occurred around Kentucky. The Conoys had become powerful in the Kenhawaii Valley and the Illinois on the Wabash. The Shawanese entered into an alliance with them. The Chickasaws began to grow powerful in the southwest and waged war with the Shawanese, etc. The supremacy of the Ottawas was acknowledged gradually by all the Lenapians west of the mountains, and the chief of that tribe was considered as the greatest chief. They settled in many parts of Lake Huron and Michigan, on the Mississippi, and left Kentucky to the Shawanese. Fifth period, from the Ottawa supremacy towards 1400 to the invasion of Soto towards 1540. All right, so now we're getting closer to colonial times, including about 140 years. Towards the discovery of America by Columbus in 1492, the hijack, the situation of the nations residing in Kentucky or the immediate neighborhood was nearly as follows. The Massawamis or Shawanese had possession of the greatest part of Kentucky, the Cumberland Valley in Tennessee, nearly all the banks of the Ohio, and they had settlements or colonies in Illinois, Georgia, Carolina, and Tennessee. They had nearly 100 towns, many of which were populous. The Chickasaws claimed by conquest the west of Tennessee and Kentucky, and resided southerly of the Ohio. West of the Mississippi near Kentucky, the most powerful nations were the Capahas, the Osages, the Anileos, the Kiguas, etc., the two last of Lenapian origin, and extending east far as the Wabash. In Ohio were the Miamis, Erigas, Tongorias. In Virginia, the Conoys, the Monacans, the Powhatans. In Tennessee, the Cherokees, Chuggies, or Ichias. On the St. Lawrence, 5 tribes of Mengues, the Senecas, Mohawks, Oneidas, Cayugas, Onondagos, had united into a league, which soon became formidable, under the name of Iroquois, or Five Nations, to all the Ughuzian nations. On the Atlantic shores, the Lenapian tribes had divided into numerous nations, often at war with each other for supremacy or dominion. Several other nations besides the Atalans, Cutans, Iztacans, and Ughuzians had reached various parts of America before the modern Europeans. All right, so again, seeing it in reverse, this is the true old world. Many nations came out of here, sprung out of here, such as the Mayans or Malays, the Scandinavians, the Chinese, the Ainus of Eastern Asia, the Negritians or African Negroes, etc. Right? So again, he's saying Mayans or Malays. He's saying the Malays came here and became Mayans. You see what I mean? He's seeing all that in reverse, possibly. Yeah, these are cousins, most likely the Malays. But we all know the Mayas are from here. And when he's saying the Grecians, he just means because they found so-called black people here. But as they did not settle in or near Kentucky, they do not fall under my present scope. It says here, Chapter 5, History of Kentucky, from the Spanish discovery or invasion under Soto towards 1543, till the settlement of Kentucky by the Virginians in 1773, including about 230 years. First period, Introduction. So they got the little timeline here. Discovery of America, 1492, 1496. Discovery of North America by Sebastian Cabot, 1512, by Ponce de Leon in Florida, 1520. Discovery of Georgia by Mervello, calls it Sicoria, Invasion of Georgia by De Leon in 1525, and Mervello, who are defeated by the Shawanese and other nations. And we got the story of De Leon, all right, South Carolina, Georgia. So that's the real reason they left, but the Shawanese and other nations got rid of them. 1528, a second invasion defeated the Spaniards in Florida. 1536, third invasion of the Spaniards in Florida. Alvar Nunez discovers the Mississippi and reaches Culiacan on the Pacific Ocean across the continent. Second period, 16th century. 1539, Fernando Soto, governor of Cuba, invades North America with an army of 1,050 men and 300 horses. He lands in Florida, defeats many nations and winters in the Appalachia. Now remember, these are people of color, and a lot of those 1,050 soldiers he brought were also people of color, black Europeans. Like Kondrabi saying, a more on more war, huh? 1540, Soto visits the Cofas, Cherokees, Shawanees, Kudas, etc., discovers Tennessee, wins a great battle at Mobile, and winters at the Chickasaws. 1541, battle with the Chickasaws. Soto crosses the Tucagua or Mississippi, visits Capaha and Tula, discovers Arkansas, and winters in Utwangue. 1542, Soto wanders west of the Mississippi, discovers the Missouri, and dies at Guachoya, the Washashas or Osagis, near the Anilcos or Ilicos, Illinois. All right, so they got him. They killed Soto. He is succeeded by Moscoso, who vainly attempts to reach Mexico by land, goes no further than the Akees of Tanis, and returns to the Missouri near the Osages, winters at Minoya or Minowas. 1543, the Spaniards reduced to 350 men and threatened by the king of the Kiguas or Wigwas with a powerful attack, embarked in 21 boats and going night and day reached the mouth of the Mississippi in 20 days. After losing many men in the battle with the Kiguas, who pursued them for 10 days, only 300 Spaniards reached Panuco and Mexico. discovery of Illinois and Kentucky, and descent in the Mississippi. 1545, the Muskogees settled east of the Mississippi and become afterwards the head of the Southern Confederacy. 1550, the Mengues began to wage war with all their neighbors. They destroyed the Cutans and branch of the Massawamis and settled in their country south of Lake Ontario. 1560, the Massawamis of Kentucky are at war with the southern nations and many eastern nations, but at peace with the nations north of the Ohio. They form a settlement on the Susquehanna. 1562 to 68, settlements and wars of the French and Spaniards in Carolina and Georgia, in which many nations take a part. 1584 to 89, first settlements of the English in North Carolina, wars with the Ughuzians, 3 unsuccessful colonies. Kentucky was included in the charter of the colony. 1590, Wahun Sanakok, king of the Powhatans in Virginia, conquers many tribes and becomes formidable to all his neighbors, even the Massawamis and Iztacans of Kentucky. He adopts Opechan, a wise Shawnee, for his brother and makes him king of Pamunkey. You hear that? That's pretty deep right there, something to look further into. In 1595, the Iztacans, a powerful nation of Mengue origin, is now scattered from the Lake Erie to Florida and various tribes, called Erieronans, Angorias, Rechehecrians, Grigras, and is at war with the Mengues of Tennessee. Third period, 17th century, 1607, permanent settlement of the English in Virginia, the colony including Kentucky in its charter. The French settle in Canada. 1608, first interview of the English with the Shawnees of Wassawamis of Kentucky. Sir J. Smith meets one of their war parties in the Chesapeake, going to attack the Susquehannos and Toiboys. The Nanticos of Maryland went to trade with them beyond the mountains. 1618, death of Wahun Sanako, king of the Powhatans. He is succeeded by Opechan, the Shawnee king of Pamunkey. Now all of a sudden he is the king of Pamunkey and the Powhatans, and he was a Shawnee who takes the title of Mango Yeoman and becomes the foe of the settlers. 1640, the Mengues succeed to destroy the Iztacans of Ohio. The remains of that nation fly to East Kentucky, etc. 1642, end of the wars between the English and Powhatans, which had lasted 20 years. Opechan is taken and dies at 95 years old. He is succeeded by his son Totopotomoy, who makes peace. 1654, Colonel Wood explores Kentucky as far as the Mississippi. 1656, the Rechehecrians or Grigras cross the Allegheny and invade Virginia. Being molested by the Mengues, Captain Hill and King Tomoy, who attacked them, are defeated. The king is killed. They soon after leave the country and are admitted by the Natchez into their confederacy. 1660, the Mengues, rendered powerful by firearms, lay waste all the country on the Ohio and make war on the Togorias, Shawnees, Miamis, Illinois, Chickasaws, Natchez, etc., often coming down the Ohio in war parties. They destroy the Conoys or Kenhaways. 1667, Captain Bad visits the Allegheny Mountains from Virginia. 1670, Captain Bold visits Kentucky from Virginia. Is he the same as the above? They might be the same person, he's saying. 1672, Father Marquette descends the Mississippi from Illinois and discovers the Missouri, Ohio, Wabash, etc. He finds 40 towns of Shawnees on the Ohio and its lower branches. 1680, Father Hennepin descends the Mississippi to its mouth from Illinois and visits Kentucky. The Tennessee is called Cherokee River. 1683, Captain Tonty descends the Mississippi to its mouth for the first time with LaSalle. Kentucky visited again. 1685, second voyage of Tonty down the Mississippi. 1688, third voyage of Tonty down the same. 1700, at the end of the century, the Shawnees of Kentucky were defeated and humbled by the Mengues. Those of Georgia were compelled to enter the Muskogee Confederacy. The Tongorias of East Kentucky were united with the Cherokees, and the Illinois, Miami, Chickapones, etc., often crossed Kentucky to go to war against the Chickasaws. Fourth period, 18th century. 1710, Colonel Spotswood, governor of Virginia, crosses the Allegheny Mountains and explores the country near Kentucky. 1712, the great Appalachian nation destroyed, partly by the Carolinians in 1702 and the Alabamos in 1705. The remains blend with the Muskogee Confederacy. All right, they had a big war. 1720, the French traders began to descend the Ohio. 1722, Treaty at Albany between the Virginians and Mengways or Iroquois. The land west of the Allegheny Ridge is acknowledged as belonging to the Iroquois, who claim it by conquest over the Eddigas, Conoys, Tongorias, etc. 1731, the Notches are destroyed by the French. The remains of that great nation take refuge with the Chickasaws. A war follows in consequence with the French, which lasts many years. 1739, Mr. Longueuil descends the Ohio from Canada and discovers Big Bone Lick in Kentucky. Many Canadians follow that road. 1745, the Shawnees of Kentucky had retreated on the banks of the Ohio, Miami, and Muskingum to avoid their southern enemies. Being now at peace with the Mengways and allied with them against the Cherokees, Catawbas, Muskogees, Chickasaws, etc. Kentucky remained a hunting ground of the northern and southern nations where they met at war. 1750, Dr. Thomas Walker of Virginia crosses the Allegheny and Washioto Mountains, which he calls Cumberland. He discovers Cumberland Gap, the Shawnee River, which he calls Cumberland River, Kentucky River, which he calls Louisa. 1751, several Indian traders descend the Ohio. 1752, Lewis Evans publishes his map of Kentucky from the account of those traders. 1754, James McBride descends the Ohio as far as the mouth of the Kentucky. 1760, second visit of Dr. Walker to Kentucky as far as Dick River. 1764, the Shawnees removed to Ohio from Pennsylvania and to the Wabash from Green River. 1767 to 1774, Kentucky is visited by traders and hunters from Virginia and North Carolina and begins to be settled after extinguishing the claims of the Cherokees and Iroquois, but the Shawnees' best claim having never been attended to. This was the cause of the war which they waged with their allies against the Virginian settlers for more than 20 years. Ever since 1756, an alliance of all the Ughuzian tribes north of the Ohio having been formed against the Iroquois, Cherokees, and Chickasaws, the Virginians were considered as new intruders who had bought the land from their foes. Conclusion. All the details which might have explained, and the notes which would have proved my statements have been unavoidably omitted in order to confine myself within the short prescribed limits. I am merely allowed to add the enumeration of the principal monuments of antiquity, and a mere list of the authors in which all the facts are to be found which I have asserted, except those derived from my personal examination of the geology, antiquities, and languages of North America. A philological and ethnological view of nearly 400 American and Eastern nations or languages, with their comparative names for land and water, was also found by far too long for insertion, although this is now considered as the base of historical researches. All right. And that's the end of the book, guys. I told you it wasn't a long book. Hope you guys enjoyed this information. I just want to, again, remind you, as he said right here, this is a lot of it. I'm just telling you from my research. Again, he's in 1824. He's still with that whole out of Asia theory. But little did they know that America, North America at least, was considered part of Asia or greater China or greater India, India Superior, or as we read today, the great Atlantis. So I would say that he may be writing a lot of things. He may be adding a few extra things, but there was definitely a lot of gems to pull out of this reading. Thanks for reading this book along with me. I finally was able to read it. I've been holding it for years. So now we have it out. We can use it for reference in case we come up with this same information somewhere else. Thanks for sticking around all the way to the end of this reading. Appreciate you guys taking the time to do that. Again, apply what we read today and what we learned to the rest of the information and research we have gone over the years, and let's try to make sense out of it. Much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Wow.